Is love enough when money disappears? This is not hate. This is a critique. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to The Long Take. This is the space where we do not rush films, we do not shout, we don't hype blindly. We sit with them and we talk about what worked, what did not work, and more importantly, what could have been better. This is the first YouTube film that I'm critiquing on The Long Take. In 2026, I'll be doing more YouTube film critiques because honestly, that space is growing fast and it deserves serious conversations too. So now let's start with the premise and the core idea. At its core, is trying to ask a very simple but important question. Is love enough when money disappears? Now we follow Ekene, played by Uzo Arukwe, a very wealthy man, married to Dami, played by Bimbo Ademoye, who comes from a much more modest background. And, they've been married for 2 years. Ekene spoils Dami silly. Everything she wants, cars, clothes, lifestyle, he provides. And from the jump, we already introduced to the central tension. People around Ekene believe Dami married him for the money. Ekene doesn't believe that, okay? Love in his mind is enough. Now, that premise is strong, very strong actually. It's relatable, especially in our society where love and money are constantly put on the same scale. Now, the problem is not the idea. The problem for me is, however, I think the problem is how far the story pushes that idea. Now, let's go to the story development. Now, this for me is where the story falls short, a bit. This is where my biggest critique sits, okay? The story had a lot of ingredients, but it always did not allow them to cook properly. We had class difference, we had power dynamics in the marriage, pride, ego, community politics, manipulation, blackmail, loyalty, and the fear of returning to poverty. That's a lot, right? But instead of letting these elements breathe, the film often moves from plot point to plot point a bit too quickly. For example, Damilade's internal struggle, the fear of being broke again, should have been explored more deeply. We see her panic, we see her frustration, but we don't always sit in it long enough. Same with Ekene's decision to test his wife. That's a massive emotional move. It's not a small prank. It's a life-altering lie. The film touches it. It doesn't fully interrogate it. Was it insecurity? Was it fear? Was it pride? Was it control? See, those questions are there, but the script doesn't slow down enough to really unpack them. And now let's go to Uzo Arukwe and typecasting, right? Now, this part is important. Uzo Arukwe has become very popular playing rich Igbo men, loud, confident, sometimes uncouth, sometimes charming. The interesting thing is, he's actually played other types of roles more often. He's got range. But this particular version of him is what the audience responds to the most. So the question becomes, is this good for his career? Short answer, yes and no. Yes, because it's recognizable, it sells, it creates a brand. Now, no, because it risks flattening his range and it makes audiences stop expecting surprises. He plays this character well, but it also feels familiar. And that's not a crime, but it's something to be mindful of going forward. Let's talk about the acting. Honestly, the acting was good all around. Bimbo Ademoye carries Dami with confidence. She balances softness, pride, fear, and assertiveness, quite well. Uzo Arukwe as Ekene is very comfortable on screen. He understands presence, he understands timing, he understands how to command attention without shouting, even though he shouted a lot of times. Osazi Godaro brings calm maturity to her role. Her character works mostly as a moral anchor, and she plays that effectively. Nobody fell out of place, in my opinion. Nobody felt like they did not belong to the story or in the story. The performances for me were not the problem. And now let's talk about the setting and the production design. The setting worked. The estate wasn't over-designed. It wasn't doing too much. It fit the mood of the story. Sometimes simplicity works better than excess, and this film understood that. The neighborhood dynamics felt believable. The women's association felt very Nigerian, very recognizable, and you could almost hear similar conversations happening in real life. So that part was well observed, in my opinion. Now let's go to cinematography and the visual choices. Now this is another area where I thought the film could have been stronger. Now the cinematography wasn't bad, but it wasn't intentional enough. For a story dealing with emotional distance, power shifts, internal conflict, the camera could have helped more. More controlled framing, more visual mood, more moments where, silence and composition do the talking. It did not distract, but it did not elevate, the story either. Now let's go to the themes and resolution. The film ultimately tries to land on love, forgiveness and community. And it does, mostly, but some resolutions felt a bit too neat, right? Real emotional damage doesn't always clean itself up that quickly, and while films do not need to be depressing, they should still feel honest. Now, the ending works emotionally, but it could have felt earned, with a deeper exploration earlier. Now let's go to sound, the score, and the editing. Sound and score for me needed more emotional guidance. There were moments that should have lingered emotionally, but the pacing rushed past them. The editing in particular needed a more moody rhythm. Let moments land, let silence breathe, let discomfort, let it sit. Sometimes the cut came too quickly and it softened moments that should have been uncomfortable. Now, that for me could have been easily, leveled, for a film like this. Now, my final thoughts. It is a well-intentioned film with solid performances and a strong premise. Its biggest weakness is not a talent, it's depth. And, with more patience in storytelling, more emotional breathing room, and stronger technical intention, this story could have hit much harder. And as a first YouTube film critic on The Long Take, it is exactly why these conversations matter. YouTube films deserve critique too. They deserve honesty too, because that's how the space grows. Now, YouTube films deserve critique too. They deserve honesty too, because that's how this space grows. And for those who are comparing this film to, Ominous Film, Love in Every Word, they're two different films, okay? The premises are two different premises. You probably are saying that because the character that Uza played is similar, but you're two different films, okay? So yeah, if you enjoy this breakdown, this is just the beginning, okay? More YouTube film critiques are coming in 2026. This has been The Long Take. I'll see you in the next one.